strategy when they adjourned without scheduling veto session.
Absolutely.
I follow some of the Vermont political reporting.
Yeah, sometimes I have to,
Am I doing a roll call?
you know, reread
When
like
you call it to
several
order.
of their ratings to
When
figure out.
when someone calls a meeting to order, do a roll call.
Over there every day
So anybody can call it to order.
to figure out what's going on.
I can't. Anything but me.
Would you?
So, do you just make a determination? I don't have to preside over
Yeah,
special
and
meetings, or
sometimes
do
I
I?
find myself.
You'll preside to the extent
Wait a
you
minute,
start
is
the
that New
meeting.
York or
I mean, so you do the
Vermont?
beginning to the end, and then turn it over to me, and then it's gonna be very informal. It's a discussion. We're not gonna take any action today, it's just a discussion.
Right.
It's a way to be all in the same room.
Okay.
Is Mike's not coming? Is Pat will be here in a few minutes.
Later. He
Late.
said noonish. Yeah.
Let's call this special meeting to order today with the subject. I think you'll be running a lot of the meeting, working directly with the councilors on interpretation of the charter.
Mayor Reed,
Present.
Counselor Armstrong,
Here?
Counselor Kelly, Counselor Dowdle,
Here.
Counselor Ensel,
Here.
Counselor McFarland, Counselor Crenson.
Here.
Okay, so purpose of this meeting is described as a workshop. I want to treat it pretty informally, just a way based on some of the ongoing discussions, really to, on one extent, get on the same page as far as what the charter says, and also to kind of clear the air so there's no more lingering questions as to who has what duty and who has what power. I've printed out and that's circulated some relevant sections from the charter, essentially Article 3, which is the Common Council's powers and duties, and then Article 4 talks about the mayor's powers and duties. And I think it would be helpful for us to kind of just walk through some of the key points, make sure we're all on the same page, and then we can ask questions as we go. I don't expect any action or decision to come out of this. It's really just to get on the same page. So with that, before we delve into it, we all know, at least I hope we know, this is a strong mayor-council system where the mayor is essentially the CEO of the city and the council is the legislative body, the policymakers of the city. So that's the basic framework that we're in. This was accepted or re-accepted by the public after the 2015 Charter Commission when they approved this form of government. As you may recall, there was a ballot proposition asking whether or not we should have a city manager form of government, and that was rejected by the public. So this is the system that we're in. The intention again is to just walk through the charter first, specifically the sections on duties and prohibitions, and then maybe we'll go through the council powers first. I'll kind of run through the highlights, and then we can ask questions either as we go or at the end. Really don't have a specific agenda. I just wanted to take, this has been a common request for some meetings that we have this from the mayor, from several councilors. So here we are. I don't expect any public input here. This is really public's invited as an open meeting, but it's not a typical meeting. It's a special meeting to discuss this, and again, no action should result based on what occurs today. So before we jump in, any big picture questions or procedural questions? Okay, and has everyone seen, I mean, it's the charter, so it's not something you haven't seen before, but everyone has the packet that's in front of them? Okay, so again, we didn't print the whole charter, we just took out the section of, started with the section of Article 3, Common Council. I don't see any specific sections that jump out until we get to C3.8, powers and duties. So first and foremost, C3.8A, council has the power to enact, amend, and rescind local laws, ordinances, and resolutions. We obviously do resolutions frequently, local laws less frequently, and in my experience, ordinances we do not use as a legislative vehicle. Ordinance is something in between a local law and a resolution to simplify it. But we all know that. Pretty straightforward. Any questions on C3.8A as far as what the council's powers are? Okay.
Can you clarify, there's been some discussion, there's a philosophy among some in the community that since a local law in essence changes provisions of the charter of the city, that they're illegal, is what I've heard people say. And can you clarify that the power of the local law to affect terms of the charter?
Of the charter specifically? Sure. So we have made charter changes via local law. That is one mechanism to make a change to a charter. The other mechanism is to call a charter commission either by petition of the public or by direction of the council. From my perspective, if you're doing a holistic review of the charter, which is what happened in 2015, and we were taking on the big questions of, how is the city going to be fundamentally organized, that's something that should be addressed by the public. But conversely, if you're doing a more discrete change that doesn't affect the fundamental way the city operates, but really just modifies a specific section of the charter, it's certainly permissible under municipal home rule. I believe it's section 10 that says city council has the power to amend their charter. I mean, it's our guiding document, so as long as you follow those processes, you can change it by local law. Now, with that being said, certain local laws do trigger referendums, and depending on the local law, may or may not trigger either a permissive referendum or a mandatory referendum, which is that protection, which also then puts it back to the public if it's a kind of a big question that should be triggered by that. So, if your question is, can we change the charter by local law? Yes.
Dean, I have another question regarding this section. The sentence right above section A says the council shall have, but not limited to. That the words "but not limited to" seem to me to imply that there are other duties that we could go beyond letters A through J.
And we do. I mean, that's part of the purpose of today. I recognize that. I mean, if you jumping ahead real quickly to the mayor section, you'll see there's some more subjective language. Talks about an M
Oh, God.
in C4.3M to promote partnerships and encourage staff. I mean, those are pretty ambiguous terms. So it's in that context, there's not everything's going to be addressed in this document. But yeah, I mean, I recognize this isn't the exact limit of it because obviously things are going to come up that are outside of it. Distilling it down to its essence, I think it comes down to council has the power to enact laws, set policy, and holds the purse. You guys control the purse, the power of the purse. So when it says, with that basic framework in mind, you wouldn't all of a sudden, with that language, have the power to now direct a department, or supervise a department, because that's clearly a CEO, a chief executive officer type function. So to me, so long as it's within those basic frameworks of legislation, policy, money, or investigations, which will come up in a second, that's how I see those,
Within, not limited to, but within a scope.
Exactly, yeah.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
Section B in C3.8 came up last summer and last fall. So council and the policy-making powers has the ability to kind of set up how the city will operate via departments. We have to guarantee certain services, either through city departments or through private contractors if we can guarantee that those services will be provided. So that came up. We exercised this power within the past year more frequently, at least in my experience, than we had ever in the past. Any questions on C3.8B as far as the framework of the departments, not the day-to-day operation of the departments, but whether a department exists and how many departments we have? Any questions on that? Or questions on that power to establish those departments? Okay. C3.8C talks about confirming mayoral appointments of city officers, department heads, and assistant department heads. So again, this comes up pretty frequently. Typically, it's a manager, anyone above a union that the city is going to be, that the council is going to be confirming the mayor's appointments. He's obviously making the recommendation, so in order for a resolution or an action to move forward, it requires 4 affirmative vote, the majority vote of the body, which is 4 affirmative votes by the mayor making that recommendation. That just requires 3 more votes from the council to be approved. Notably, it does not include employees, but later on you'll see the council in section J, the council does have the power to set the salary for any employee. So it depends on the circumstance, but typically you guys, the council will receive confirmation of approval and also setting the salary for employees, but in some contexts, either through the CBA or through a prior management compensation policy that's already been established by the council. So sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't as far as specific employees.
Would this come up during level 4 management?
Yeah, as far as the salary, yeah, because the mayor is setting the salary at the time when he makes a recommendation for the level 4 hire, and in section J, the council is establishing the salary of all employees and officers of the city.
And that establishment is being made upon the recommendation of the mayor?
Yeah.
That would be exclusive of any collective bargaining agreements.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, I'm presuming we were talking managers, not union members. Okay. D has not come up in my time, but it certainly could. It authorizes the council has the power to enact legislation over the disapproval of the mayor. So there's some later sections that we haven't touched on yet, but the mayor has the power to veto a resolution or veto a local law, and then there's a process described in the charter how the council could then overturn that veto. Essentially, it requires a slight supermajority to overrule the mayor's veto if he makes that veto. Has not come up, but if and when it does.
Would a supermajority be 5 or 4?
It's we'll get to in a second. I believe it's 4 actually. So typically, a supermajority is majority plus 1. So I shouldn't have said that word, but the mayor, if his, we'll get to it when we get to it, I guess, yeah, rather than
I didn't mean to jump,
yeah.
you brought it up, I just.
Okay. To me, one of the primary functions is to adopt the annual budget. Last year you did it earlier. This year you're focusing on the 5-year plan, which we'll get to in a second. But that's your primary function is to adopt the budget. So you're well familiar with that. Appropriate monies, so that comes up when there is a change to the budget, when the council is doing an amendment for some cost overrun or a purchase order that's come up, those also come in front of the council. Essentially, and anytime there's a litigation that needs to be settled through the payment of money, comes to the council. We can certainly discuss topics back in executive session, but the council's never taken an action back in executive to appropriate money. Can't think of any circumstance where that's arisen. So that's, to me, one of the, other than the legislation, the budget is it's squarely within within one of your duties.
And once the budget is passed, presumably the administrator can then reallocate consistent with the budget, as long as the budget is adhered to. But if there's anything that goes beyond the approved budget,
yeah,
I need to seek additional.
Yeah, and then there's a mechanism in the charter for a budget amendment that they can go through. Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, if a budget is approved, say, I guess, and it's broken down departmentally or what have you, technically the mayor is empowered to be able to change those allocations. I guess I'm just using a hypothetical situation. Let's say there's a certain budget for DPW, okay, and then something comes up in another department. The mayor is able to then reallocate funds from the DPW budget to another department?
I don't believe I can.
No, not to reallocate. So there's some,
Okay, that's what, when you said your question, that's what brought it,
so there's some
as far as reallocating funds.
I didn't provide this for this purpose, but in section C6, 6, it talks, in the charter, talks about budget amendments after adoption, and that talks about excess appropriation, emergency appropriation, reduction of appropriation, kind of describes, you know, it's difficult to talk about in the abstract, but anything that could come up, there is a mechanism provided
Okay.
in the charter for that.
Okay.
But for this purpose, this is just the annual budget that you're adopting, that's the
Okay.
big picture.
Which is the total number.
Yep. F, we have a requirement to perform annual independent audits. So that's just another power of the purse to really make sure that the money is being spent properly and also audited properly.
And we do that every year with the independent audits.
G, you should be familiar with, because you guys delved into that the past few weeks, that's to prepare the 5-year plan. It's more aspirational, it's not your budget, but it's what you're trying to get the budget to aspire to. Pretty straightforward. Any questions on annual budget or the 5-year plan? H talks about designating the mayor or designated city officer to enter into contracts and execute deeds. We adhere to that I take a pretty conservative approach with that, with trying to bring everything to the council that says the word contract. Deeds comes up less often, but sometimes we'll have abandonment of right-of-ways or things of that nature. But essentially, it's contracts. So the development of the contract typically falls on me. As far as the form, the substance would depend on the mayor, and then the council deeming it, worthwhile, not worthwhile, whatever you guys want. As far as the contract itself,
I did discuss with Dean sometime this week whether that be necessary for relatively small contracts. Below, I asked if there's a figure, a de minimis figure, like under 5,000, under 1,000 or something, that just to expedite things, whether the mayor would have the authority to do those smaller contracts, something we could discuss. But up till now, we've been assuming contracts of any sorts are all brought to the council.
so that's the more conservative approach. I mean, you could make a change in the charter to have that, similar to what you do for department heads under $500 or something. Department heads don't require a formal approval, but unless we change, anything comes back to the council. Pat, just to bring you in real quick, we're just running through the powers and duties of the common council. So
Page 12.
trying to treat this as an informal kind of question and answer session where we're touching on a topic, addressing any issues that come up, and then trying to move forward.
Okay.
Right now, we just went over C3H, which is authorizing the mayor to enter into contracts or execute deeds. I is one of the more controversial ones, I guess. Not only do you have legislative power, policy power, and power of the budget, but you can also have your balance of powers by performing a check on either the mayor's office or any city department or agency within the city. This I read as the body as a whole, so the council, common council, not individual council members, can start an investigation into a specific topic. In addition, you have subpoena power, which is powerful. You can take testimony, administer oaths, require individuals to appear, and you may not have ever exercised this, but if someone ignored a lawful subpoena, you could actually seek their imprisonment or fine them for $500. This will be relevant in a second when we get to C3.9, because there's some other references to inquiries and investigations. But again, I view this and interpret this as the council as a whole can make investigations into the city. To commence an investigation, it would, like anything, would have to be an action at a council meeting. You wouldn't want to have something so open-ended that you didn't know what the scope was, so you want to have a limited scope. We're investigating X purchase because we have, I'm trying to make just a specific example. Something in the past that's happened, you wouldn't want to investigate something that you could never answer. So it hasn't come up in my time. I don't think it has years past. We have our council historian here, Joe. Has any recollection of investigating only once? So, any questions on that topic? Okay. And we touched on this briefly. Council has the power to establish salaries schedules, and fringe benefits. So, not for today, but obviously, the council's been working on the management comp packages. Level 4 removed that salary schedule for new manager hires. We have numerous city employees that are bound by a CBA, which council may have some authority to approve a contract, but doesn't really get into the specific employee salaries, other than approving a specific contract. Any questions on Jay?
Yes. How does that compare when civil service does a salary range? How do we then set salaries lower than what the civil service range indicates?
There's no such thing as a civil service range.
There isn't?
No.
Yeah, it was understood that we have the power, I mean, they certainly have an ability to apply the civil service rules, but I don't think they have a power to tell the city what or what not to hire someone at.
Okay. Now, when their civil service exam is given, isn't there typically a
range provided.
range within that exam for that?
Yeah, but
Position or-
they're going back, I mean, that's a conversation. I mean, the civil service is not our agents necessarily in a direct principal agency relationship, but they're carrying out the civil service rules or interpreting or applying civil service rules on behalf of the city. So presumably those ranges had originated from the city as far as what we would base on it. I mean, more specifically, if it's a specific example, I can look into it. Yeah, I don't know in the abstract though.
The deputy chamberlain's position?
Is there a specific, I haven't seen those numbers. Is there?
I understood there was a salary range.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't looked into that specifically.
And to establish the salaries, when you go to hire someone, how do you tell them what their salary will be if they haven't been established yet? And how can we establish a salary prior to hiring?
The only individuals I would be able to hire, any new managers, would be level 4s, new managers. And we always make it clear that I recommend an appointment and a salary to the council, and the council has to affirm it. So they're told that in advance. They're not told that this is the salary they're gonna get.
But if,
So yeah, they're
I guess,
offers
but
are
if it says
contingent
here that the within the powers of the council is to establish the salaries, well then, before a hire, it should come to the council to establish what the
It's a cart and
salary
horse
would be
issue. I mean,
paid.
I think when they're hired based on an interview that they have with the mayor, and he'll say, this is the salary I'm gonna propose for you, subject to the council's approval. So it's a cart and a horse issue, so
Yeah,
you're.
I see that, but I'm just saying, when you
Yeah.
look at the,
So
if you literally take the wording,
Yeah.
the council, it's within the council's purview to establish the salary.
Yeah, so hopefully whoever the mayor is wouldn't come up with a salary that was so out of left field that the council wouldn't be on board. There would be some communication ahead of time, hey, we're thinking about hiring X employee, here's what I'm thinking of offering. All right, sounds good, but.
I think that the conversation between the executive and the legislative would be implicit, because we would be bound to make sure that budgetarily, whatever the proposal was, would be sound and sustainable.
Within the budget.
Within what we know our current budget and 5-year budget is. So, I mean, it seems like it could be clearer, but.
Right.
Well,
I mean, if
But
you're gonna
it's a
hold the charter
process.
to
It's-
the,
it's-
to the,
Well, I
to
think
the
Rochelle makes a
word,
good
it-
point. I mean, it could be a conversation, or it could be predetermined based on what numbers you allocate in the budget. We need X employee, let's put 50 grand for next year for that employee, and then he'll know what he has to work with.
Because civil service also comes into play, when we went to the senior planner model, that item was, I believe, to be the senior position in the city. Then civil service said, no, they have to be junior. So you have to get the salary under the community developer. So we started the community developer considerably higher than the past community developer to get the senior planner under that. Then civil service said, no, you can't, I believe, put them under this community developer. So salaries were getting bumped to get them junior. So civil service certainly has a play in this.
Yeah, no, they can't tell you what the numbers could be, but they can establish the framework that we
Right.
can operate under.
Well,
Right.
and it seems to me if there needed to be further clarity because of our respective duties. It would be within our purview to establish some kind of set policy.
Certainly.
Some
I mean, if there's something that's
guidelines.
not working, you know, we're
Yeah.
getting caught in a
Right, I
bad
mean,
situation, then.
if we were to believe that, you know, there had been some kind of practice that could have been improved upon, then we could take it upon ourselves to make clearer within guidelines and policies how that process would work, so that we wouldn't get into future binds
Or if
regarding
it could work, maybe to ask first before presenting it.
Well, I don't think you want to get yourself into that gray area. You set policy and you determine the budget. It sounds like you're proposing to veer into the process of negotiating with employees, and I think that'd be an inappropriate and a dangerous position for the council to find itself in, because then employees would feel the need to then directly negotiate with individual councilors, which is prohibited later on in the charter.
But I think maybe we should not negotiate, but with civil service to see what our parameters are and what can be done.
The council doesn't have a relationship with civil service, that's administrative, it's not
I think you're talking
legislative.
in general, the city should have a better practice in dealing with civil service as opposed, is that what you're, I don't know. And that's, well, heated, yeah.
Well, I just have a point of order question for this meeting. It was my understanding that you'd be providing this information to us, and then if we have questions, the mayor or the council have any questions, we would direct them to you and you'd be able to answer them for us. Is that the way this meeting is set up?
I treat it very informally, I mean,
Okay.
I'll talk to each other, I don't.
Okay.
yeah, I don't-
Okay.
If you want to limit it like that, that's fine, I don't have a preference.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not,
I prefer that personally.
okay, well, let's try to keep on that plan. Okay, so that was it, and, you know, other than Peter's point, as far as there are potentially other undescribed powers, the general framework's pretty clear. It's, again, legislation, policy, budgeting, and investigations.
Are there examples of other powers that aren't enumerated in that list that the council has, or other councils have exhibited in the past?
This, part of the reason why we're here, I guess, is to make sure that we don't get into situations where there's counselors or department heads thinking they need to go to the council for direction. So just to reestablish the framework that you're the legislative body and he's the CEO.
I just want to get back to the point, though, about developing parameters for negotiation. I think what we're talking about are the parameters for negotiation rather than the actual negotiation.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Rochelle, what you're, I think, maybe asking that if we know that there's a position available, which we're searching for, that the council kind of know the salary range perhaps that is being looked at, because technically that's our responsibility to
And that's even
establish
more
the
relevant
salary.
now after the level 4 manager, where you give a lot more leeway. I mean, previously it was a schedule, and you would look at the schedule and find your step.
Right, but I think we would
Now-
still
now-
need, we would
now
still need to know,
That's what I'm saying.
A
You need to
salary
know that
range.
more. Now
Right.
you need that more.
right.
Okay.
Good.
All right, any other general questions or specific questions on C38?
Well, some of these are permissible and some of them are required, right? The 5-year plan, a lot of them to enact legislation over the disapproval of the mayor as provided by this charter. That's obviously permissible, it's not required, but the 5-year plan seems to indicate the plan shall be adopted by resolution, shall be revised annually to include 5-year. So some of those are required, but not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, you have the power to, it doesn't mean you're gonna exercise that power, certainly. Then we'll move on. C39, this is probably one of the more controversial areas that we'd be exploring today. Actually, A, not so much, I guess. It's pretty straightforward. Talks about the council does not have the power to demand that a certain employee or officer be hired or terminated. So they can't make that specific request, but certainly you can express your views likely during an executive session with the mayor regarding a particular employee's performance or prospective performance. So that one's pretty straightforward. Any questions on A?
No, but before we get to B, because it does mention section C3.8I again.
Yep.
I had a question on that actually now, because it's failure of refusal to obey law shall be a undefined misdemeanor punishable by a fine of $500 or by imprisonment of 15 days or both. If that were to come up, how does that work? Does that go to the city court and Judge Rogers decides if someone?
I knew you'd ask that question. It's never, we've never in practice done it. I would imagine, yeah, you'd have to bring in a peace officer to help draw up charges for violating that section. I mean, it's not a penal violation. Or a sheriff's office, I mean, it's like ignoring a subpoena. If a judge tells you to go to, you know, a court officer or a judge tells you to show up for a trial date and you don't show up, you're gonna be arrested and brought in and explain why you failed to appear. And you'll sit in jail until you testify or the case is over. So, never exercise it. I have to research the actual specific, if it ever came up.
But you're kind of asking, does the council have the power to prosecute a misdemeanor? And it seems likely that they don't. All they can do is ask a district attorney to prosecute.
Yeah, I would not say that you would be the adjudicator, you would be the
And we-
prosecutor.
Charger.
We wouldn't have the parameters to set the fine or the sentence either, as
No,
it's
that
written
would be a
here.
judge.
right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's due process kicks in at some, very quickly in that circumstance. All right, so turning back to C39B, in essence, in order to, I guess, preserve the mayor's supervision powers over his employees, except for purposes of inquiries, which is not defined, and investigations that Councilor McFarland just referenced, individual council members shall deal with, in broad term, city officers and employees who are subject to the mayor's supervision solely through the mayor, and individual council members shall not give orders to any such officer or employee publicly or privately. So the intent of this charter provision is to preserve the mayor's authority so that department heads, employees don't have two bosses. This sometimes is probably not clear to some department heads, so they may, you know, based on the former liaison model, come to you or make a request, and as a person, you're gonna answer that request. So there's a scenario where the council may not be out there directing employees, but employees may be coming to the council for certain circumstances. If that were to arise, I think the better practice would be to say, sorry, under my limited powers, I would ask that we involve the mayor's office or your department head and then go through the formal chain of command. Certainly, from my perspective, if you're having an informal conversation as a resident of the city, how's the weather, how's the game last night, would not see that as being any issue. It's really the situation of, hey, I need you to pave this street because I have potholes on my street, or you know, any kind of crazy circumstance like that. That's where that would be an issue. And that's pretty clear when it talks about orders, but it also talks about dealing with, and that's kind of a loose terminology.
Very strange.
It's very broad.
Yeah, when it says, like, Dean, where it says, individual council members shall deal with city officers and employees who are subject to the direction and supervision of the mayor solely through the mayor. I guess I look at a situation yesterday. Councilor Dowdle and I met with the police chief and the building inspector regarding city business under the Public Safety Commission.
So
Technically, if you were to read this, if you take it to the letter,
yeah.
and I guess that's one of the issues that I'm having, not just with this, but with some of the other things that have been pointed out, that it seems like a lot of this is extremely subjective, in that everything is open to interpretation, and it would depend upon whose interpretation it is.
There's validity to that. I mean, this isn't a perfect document. For that example, as far as meeting with 2 employees, I probably would have, if it came to me ahead of time, I would have suggested that you go to the mayor's office. Probably he would have said yes, don't know, but I think it's a question of their allocation of what they're doing for that day. So if you said, hey, we want to meet, chiefs today, and they had 3 other things going on, they would probably drop what they're doing to meet with you because they would see you as in a position of authority. So you're probably not going to get pushback from employees or department heads if you make that request. Now you do have the power to have inquiries. And so there's another ambiguous term of what does that mean?
Right.
There is no definition of inquiry in this charter, and under the rules of statutory construction, you look to a definition, you look to the plain language of what does that word mean as your first step. So inquiry just
Would be a question, just asking a question.
Yeah, I mean I pulled the kind of online definition. It's an act of asking for information, or it's an official investigation. So when it has that dual other meaning, I see that comma that's right there. And I don't know if that comma was intentional, but if that comma was not there, I would presume that they were just using simile for inquiry investigation, but that comma is there.
So
Still
you're
seems to separate
separating
it
out
out.
the
So it's
investigations
almost like you have to
under
put-
C38, investigations under C38
Under
is
C38,
one phrase.
Yeah, and we already talked about that being as a common council body can make
Right.
investigations.
But inquiries is separate.
Yep, and so inquiries
broader.
comes in, that it's asking for information. I think it would depend on what the request was. So if you're saying, what happened 6 weeks ago with this issue that I'm concerned about, that to me would be more of an inquiry. But if you're saying, what should we do about this issue that's coming up in the future, that's more policy, kind of future-based, policy information you're seeking to make a policy, which would be inappropriate.
So it almost seems like anytime you talk to a department head, you have to play a game of Jeopardy and ask everything in the form of a question.
Well,
I think it would be more if there's limited circumstances when you should be talking one-on-one with the department head.
yeah, I mean, and I go back
For
to
for city business, obviously.
But it becomes clear, the judgment that I think Dean is recommending that we use has to do with avoiding situations in which the employee is asked to decide who's my boss. What do I have to
Right.
do? What are my priorities? And I especially appreciate, the perspective that our inquiries will take on a level of importance perhaps that we underestimate to an employee, so that the purpose of going through the mayor's office to organize such meetings would be so that there was the discretion on the part of the mayor and the employee about where in my set of priorities should this come. Can I get back to you today? Well, shall we set up a meeting for next week? Or not drop everything and deal with your question. Now, does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Now, I guess my question, does it have to be a formal request, or could, say again in the situation yesterday that Dale put together the meeting, could he just simply send an email and CC the mayor, just basically for informational purposes, and if there is an issue, the mayor can respond and say, I prefer not?
Under strict reading, I would say, yeah, there should be that pre-request. I mean, because it talks about deal with.
Not just CC.
Not just CC.
Let's meet next week. CC mayor, we're arranging this, but mayor, we'd like to meet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
No.
Would it be fair to say that since the mayor's job is to manage the resources of the city, if there's any request that's making a resource request on part of one of our employees, including even meeting time,
Just time.
that should probably be coordinated through the mayor's office, because the mayor manages the resources of the city.
Right. And time being one of those.
Time being important one of them, sure. I know one request, very valid request that you had yesterday was to do an analysis on the savings from the departmental consolidations. I know I probably spent 4 hours on it. I expect my Chamberlain also probably spent 4 hours, half a day's work, each of us on that request. And he's a very busy person. But if a counselor makes that request, he'd have a very hard time. If you made it directly to him,
I didn't
denying
make it
the request.
directly to him, though.
Yeah.
I
It
didn't.
was a valid
Yeah,
request,
I
and I
went
felt it
through
was
the
important for him to
finance
answer that.
committee.
Sure.
That was
So
business
that,
at
so
the
there's two
finance
important points
committee.
here. So there are some carve-outs, myself specifically as a carve-out. I am counsel to the mayor, to the common council, to the department heads, to the city in general. So you can come to me without going to the mayor, and same, vice versa. Similarly, at a committee, I see this all in the same room. You can ask whatever the heck you want to ask during the committee, not asking the mayor's permission, can I ask this
Right.
department head a question?
So after a council meeting, I could go up to Richard and be like, Richard, do you know offhand what the budget item or what how much we spent on this? But
I mean, I was talking during the council meeting, but again, we're all
But-
leaving, we're all shuffling out, I don't.
But I
Well,
guess
that would be, that would be a good point, if you said, Rich, tomorrow, could you give me a report on something, I just wasn't clear about that.
Well, that's
Now
asking
you're-
him to do
you're
something.
That's
asking
asking
to
to do-
something.
But if
But
I
if
said,
we
you
went
know
up
off the
after-
top of your head, how much did we spend on electric, or,
He often does.
Right.
no.
yes.
That's
Yeah.
the gray
Because
area.
technically, it's not a resource, it's not during a common, or
Yeah,
during
I
a work session.
personally, I think that's useful, just an efficient way to just ask a quick question. If it became an issue where it was, can I get a report, then you're too far along that line.
So if I have a constituent say I'm upset with all the potholes on Miller Street,
Yeah.
is there any plans to pave that? Can I call Mike and be like, are there any plans to pave Miller Street at any time this
Yeah,
year?
that's getting to the troubling part, because he's gonna see that question as a directive. 'Cause
Influence.
even though you're saying phrasing, it's a question, but
And even
it's
taking
a loaded question.
And even taking the phone call would disrupt whatever he would be doing
Yeah,
at that moment.
yeah. So, yeah, I would say that would not be recommended, I mean, under that provision.
One interesting test, this came up from the previous mayor. I think he sent in his interpretation to you all in 2014. And he determined that if this were a request that the average citizen could make of a city employee, you as residents and citizens have every right to do that. But if it's not something that the average citizen would have access to, there's nothing that from your council legislative work that confers that additional right on you. And I don't know if that's a fair
Well,
interpretation or not.
that was
Just
actually
has
gonna
been
be my
a-
next question. What if, Dean, one of us went to a department head as a citizen? And just initially said, look at, I'm here as a citizen, I have this question for you.
I mean, you have your First Amendment, to me, trumps, or on equal footing as this charter is.
Right.
And so it's that, you have to be careful and maybe qualify it and be careful, hey, I'm also a citizen and here's my perspective, I'm not
Right.
asking for any special treatment.
Right, and,
And the reverse
Again.
would be true if
But
they come to
often
us
we-
as their counselor, hey, I live in Ward 5.
Fine.
can you
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, they should take advantage of that, but they should also have that ability to speak freely, because that's.
Often we are asked to ask questions and we are seeking answers on behalf
half of our
of
constituents.
constituents. So what route do we take in arriving at those answers?
So I was thinking of something as you were
Oh,
talking,
that's fine.
but-
No, it's, we're often asked questions of our
Yeah.
constituents, so
Yeah.
how do we, get those answers on their behalf?
So, just give me examples that'd be helpful.
Recently I received a complaint. That person had gone through an office, hadn't gotten any results, so I actually emailed the mayor and said, what should we do with this?
I think that would be the appropriate
Yeah.
route. Yeah, I mean, if you went right to the department head, then you're running
Then I
afoul
would
of it.
do- yeah.
I mean, you could also just give, if you could educate that constituent and say, here's the process, here you go talk to, and you could direct
Mm-hmm.
them to go up the chain. So I think that's what you did in that circumstance, you go to the mayor and for that route.
Well, I'll just qualify that by saying that's not always the way I've been doing things. I've been asking the question
I
of
mean,
the
it's
department head.
Well, and again, I don't wanna tell the mayor how to supervise, but it's also would be helpful, or recommended, either through a code of conduct or through some kind of administrative memorandum, where we're not just, the mayor can't tell you what to do as council members, but he can certainly tell his department heads and his employees what to do. So
Right.
as a follow-up to this conversation, I would certainly want or suggest that there be a subsequent conversation with department heads saying, hey, to be clear, this is the chain of command, this is how I want you to communicate. And, I don't wanna use, if there's a perception of a gag order or some kind of restriction on speech, that's the administrator's, that's a style that some or other administrators may use. And so it's not, kinda lost my train of thought there, but as the administrator, he can then direct the employees to follow, so you're not caught in a bad situation where they're coming to you. So it needs to go both ways, so it's not
Well, I can
putting you in a bad
remember
spot.
a procedure that we followed for a little while, in which we had to fill out a written form in
Okay,
order to
previous
speak
mayor.
in any fashion. Do you recall? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I had some of that here.
Yeah. Oh, you do? Okay.
That was under previous mayor.
That's right.
Right.
Sorry. I didn't-
So
didn't
it basically goes
specify
back
that.
to just basically managerial style.
Well-
And prerogative, then,
I'll take it from here, please. I think it goes to interpretation. It's all interpretation. On August 2nd, 2017, I asked Mayor, just to clarify, are liaisons okay to meet with their assigned department heads? The response of the same day is a strict reading of the charter from the mayor says no. Let's interpret, perhaps. Interpretation and interpretation are then included in the email. So it's a lot of interpretation. I indicated, I'm sorry it's come to this. The mayor then asked me to please CC me on all email communications. And for direct communications, can you outline to me in an email the topics you wish to discuss, follow up the results of those discussions, and also have the department head do likewise. I have researched what other mayors have done in this regard, and such a procedure seems very reasonable. Just recently, I sent the community developer a question and CC'd the mayor, asking, can you provide a list of specific DRI contracts and on whose approval they were accepted? I was then told, this is in direct violation of the city charter, provision C39, unless of course I mistakenly sent this out and meant it to be part of an official inquiry and a public forum. And am I going to hold the public hearing on this matter? With that, the mayor attached Section A about the interference with administration. Dean, you mentioned the comma that is in there, and I think that comma is important because this understanding seems to be in the punctuation. It is set apart by both commas and it is separate from inquiries. In the mayor's copy of that, the comma does not exist, and I'll show that to you if you would pass that on. And yet, I think that is copy and pasted from the charter. Yet in that charter, the comma is clearly indicated, setting it apart from inquiries and investigations. So this is where a lot of the, I think, confusion is. We're hearing one thing after the other. It's up for interpretation. Where that comma went, I don't
Yeah.
know. So that's where the confusion is. I think those are two separate issues. One is for inquiry, which is asking a question. One is for investigations.
And then there's the competing resource issue, correct?
The competing,
Resource issue.
Resource issue, that resource allocation one's time is strictly an administrative function unless you read somewhere else in the charter that the council has the ability to reallocate the resources of city employees.
please CC me in all email communications. I think we're going to need specifics on what those communications can be. And for direct communications, I would imagine that's going to the department head or a city manager, and they would then have to report back to you what we have spoken about, as I would too.
That takes resources. I mean, there's a
Yes, it
little-
does. It takes their resources as well.
Okay, what to do, Dean?
I don't have a perfect answer, but I think if we just go back to the general goal of what that is, what that section's intending to do, from my reading, is to prevent a department head from taking an order from a counselor.
Taking
From
an order.
An order.
Can they take a question? But the question requires,
Well, if the question requires them to compile a list or something, then they.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, an order is,
Yeah, that's work.
could be stand on one foot, or it could be report back on some topic, and then they have to go put resources to it.
So it's a sliding scale on how much work it is to answer the query, I guess.
yes, it could be a knowledge that's readily off the top of their head, or it's gonna need to be
I mean,
looked at.
I don't see it
but-
as open-ended though, because it does talk about council members dealing with city officers and employees solely through the mayor, and shall not give orders. So it's not just orders, it's dealing with. So again, that's not defined. What is to deal with means kind of day-to-day. It's a broad concept. So the only, to me, the only way individual council members should be dealing with employees and officers is, the only hook is the inquiry. I mean, we're obviously not talking about informal investigations, we're talking about an inquiry.
An inquiry. I had a constituent ask me, when's the street sweeper gonna swing by? If I asked, is that an inquiry? Or is that
It is
gonna
an
be,
inquiry,
is that
but-
gonna be perceived
But
as?
exactly, it's an inquiry, but it's also being perceived as an order. So a cautious best practice would be to limit those types of questions, orders.
But then it almost seems like
Best thing.
we're handcuffed in doing our responsibilities as an elected official. I mean, I think our constituents come to us or vote for us and put us in office to be their representative and to answer their questions and provide them with answers.
So perhaps the message that we're arriving at here with this interpretation is to redirect a constituent to make their own call to that whatever office they're gonna get their answer from. It seems like that's kind of implicit in this interpretation because of
Then why are
the
we here?
complexity of
Well,
you
that,
know.
I mean, that's why we walk through, you're here for those, A through J under the CPA. So it's, you don't.
So
you're-
we're here to set the budget and that's it.
You're here to legislate, but not to manage, isn't that the distinction?
Yep, technically.
Because one instance is complaints about, and I get a lot of them, multiple housing, cars, garbage, et cetera. So, and actually the neighbors don't want to put their name on anything. Just, they don't want to make
They don't
the
wanna
situation worse, or, because that usually doesn't improve it. So I do it. Is that in violation?
Are you managing or are you legislating?
I just turn in what the complaint has been brought to me about such and such an address, it's got such and such going on, and I present it to the building inspector.
Oh, yeah.
Does the building inspector feel you're managing or legislating?
I guess that's up for interpretation.
If he's filing a complaint on behalf of a constituent who prefers to remain anonymous. So, I mean, really, and that's a rather perfunctory and simple action, because he's simply filing that complaint. It
However-
requires work, but
How-
that's how we
That's the
keep,
process.
But the com-
keep our city going.
But the complaint probably would not be brought forth by the individual.
That's, yeah, because they prefer to be
Right,
anonymous.
right. And then some are fearful of retaliation and things like that, they
Yeah.
told me. So I do it, but
So I would think technically that would not fit into the same
Well,
category.
again, if you could clearly qualify that message, so it doesn't be, so it's abundantly clear to the department head that you are not directing him or asking him to do anything special, that you're merely a conduit. And put it in the beginning and put it at the end of the statement.
I mean,
You
would it
always
be,
say,
you could
"I'm
simply
on
say,
behalf of,"
a
right?
constituent has come to me and alerted me to this
Right.
situation.
I mean, that's,
You're not telling them, I want you, can you tend to this? Can you look into this? I'm making you aware of a situation that has come to my attention.
what if a
But you know that-
constituent doesn't do it? What if
The
you
likely
witness
focus
it
on one
as
that's
a
from you
counselor?
rather than Joe Schmo down the road.
Well, Peter, too, what if you as a counselor witness something? that it's not channeled through a constituent, can you then do that on,
As a regular citizen, absolutely. You've got every right as a regular citizen.
Right. So when you go see a sidewalk that hasn't been shoveled, you report it, right?
Just like a regular citizen could report
Right.
an activity on a neighbor's behalf.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
But to be safe, you might want to qualify it by saying I'm not asking for any sort of special treatment based on my position. I'm just bringing this to your attention. That'd be probably the safer
Well,
way to do it.
so one of our duties is not to represent and act on behalf of our constituents. That's not in C8
fence watching?
anywhere.
Fence watching used to be.
It used to be in there,
Fence
right?
watching.
Well,
We're
it's included but not
council.
limited to.
Hackman and Cartman.
Right, yep, what's that?
Hackman and Cartman.
Yes. Fence watching, daily.
Okay.
Do you wanna move on, or keep,
How is it enforced?
what's that?
Enforcement.
Enforcement of,
Of the separation of powers?
there's no real enforcement mechanism other than there's other sections that I didn't print out talk about qualifications of office. And one of those qualifications, live in the city, don't miss more than 3 meetings, don't commit a crime of moral turpitude, don't expressly violate the charter.
Yeah.
Not in order, but that's, that would require a pretty egregious scenario. And then public officers law kicks in if,
But that's
someone
only-
was just consistently expressly violating the charter and repeatedly, then charges could be brought up and there would be a due process there under public officers law. So, something small, public censure maybe, something, there's no enforcement mechanism other than a really egregious express violation. Anything else on C39? So let's jump over C310, just talks about the process of adopting local laws and ordinances and resolution. Really just cites the general municipal law for local laws and obviously react by resolution pretty frequently. C311, in a strong mayor form of government, gives the mayor the authority to veto any resolution or ordinance except for adoption of council rules or the adoption of the annual city budget. There's a process for the mayor to invoke that veto power or defer the decision to veto power, to do that veto. But draw your attention to C311B. Talks about if the mayor does veto a resolution, it may be reconsidered by the council within 30 days, and if it receives 4 affirmative votes, it shall be adopted. So that's your council's ability to override a mayoral veto. Jump over, any other questions on council powers and duties? Okay, talk about mayor now. Again, he's expressly the CEO of the city. Talks about his term and his residency and exclusively devoting his affairs to the city hall. C4.3 talks about powers. So A, mayor has the power to appoint and suspend or remove city employees and appoint as city officers. I'm not gonna read the whole section, but any questions on the appointment or suspension power? There's a lot of other sections of law that kick in under Article 75 of the Civil Service Law, CBA, collective bargaining agreements that would kick in. So really this applies to managers. But you'd have to obviously be careful under the labor law and under any other contractual right or wrongful termination claim that a manager may have as well. So it's not a free, unrestricted power. There's state law that kicks in or contracts that kick in a lot of these circumstances. I'll move on to B. Mayor has the power to direct and supervise the administration of all departments, officers, and agencies of the city. That just is kind of what we've been talking about. Any questions on that? Okay, mayor's got to attend the meetings. He does not have a vote, absent a tie amongst the council. And also he has the veto power that we know about. D needs to execute the laws that, and resolutions that you pass. E needs to prepare an annual budget message and implement the final budget as approved by the council. F, submit to the council, make available to the public a complete report of the finances. G is actually interesting. So as we've talked about previously, the council has the power to do a formal investigation, but under G, the council may also require a report from the mayor as to operations. So to me, that's a little less formal than a formal investigation. We're gonna subpoena witnesses, but if someone has a question about the DRI or about CD office, I can't recall a time we've done it, but a resolution on the floor during a council meeting would probably be the mechanism to make that request. Again, on a specific, for a specific report, be careful with it. I mean, you have the authority to do it, but you're also gonna require the allocation of resources, so.
So that has to be in a resolution?
Well, any council act would have to be, yeah, so this is talking about council action, not a councilor's request.
In regards to requests of the mayor for reports.
Yeah, so if council, common council has a need for further information, I'd like to make a resolution to have the mayor report on X. If it's approved by majority, then he would have a duty under the charter to report on whatever that topic was.
And that report can be done just internally through email, or would it
would
have
depend
to
on,
be
you
in a?
know, what happened, depends on the request. If it, give us a full accounting of a DRI, it would be a big request. Give us, you know, how many skunks did we capture last year would be a specific request.
It almost seems like, you know, if the requests are made through email and they're not given, then the formal mechanism to get those answers would be to do it via resolution during a council meeting.
Yeah, I mean, there doesn't seem to be, email makes, you know, we have the charter and then we have real life, and certainly things are more efficient when you ask a question, you get an answer, versus calling a resolution at a council meeting. So I like that suggestion, you know, that Josh just made is, but you know, that's also the mayor's prerogative too. If you don't want to get requests from the council because they are too onerous, you could also defer and say, look, I'm not comfortable with that. If the council really wishes to have that information, the council can act. H, again, on a similar topic, keep the council fully advised as to the financial condition and future needs of the city. So that's helpful for you to do your job. You need to know where the money is, how it's being spent, and where it's going. I make recommendations to the council concerning affairs of the city, facilitate their development of the policy and 5-year plan. And also too, the mayor, I didn't touch on this, the mayor is a member of the common council, so he wears 2 hats to the extent he is a voting member. Obviously he has restrictions on when he votes, but under the definitions in the charter, it's common council 6 plus mayor comprises the council. He's not a councilor though, obviously. Provide staff and support for the council members and for the mayor's office.
What does that mean?
It's administrative support. You know, a larger city may have other administrative needs. If council needed their own administration, you know, an administrative assistant, then you could ask the mayor for that staff. You know, smaller city, that doesn't come up too often.
That's his council members.
K talks about helping the council develop their long-term goals and strategies to implement those goals. Pretty aspirational there. L and M, again, aspirational. You want to encourage and provide staff support for regional intergovernmental cooperation. And M, promote partnerships amongst the council, staff, and citizens in developing public policy and building a sense of community. And perform such other duties as required by the common council or by the charter. Any questions on mayor powers or duties? Mayor Pro Tem, just to touch on briefly, to me, that's vice mayor for a situation when the mayor is absent. Other than that, there's not too much other power that the Mayor Pro Tem would have.
Let me ask, but when the mayor is absent from,
From his duties, so,
Meetings, or-
what's that?
absent from what?
Meeting? or-
No, so if the mayor was driving south for an afternoon, you wouldn't have a mayor pro tem stand in place because as long as he's available, let me back up. For the day-to-day operations, as long as he was available, you wouldn't have a mayor pro tem because you can email, call, and get what you need. If he was gone for a prolonged absence or, you know, in a hospital for something, you would probably want to designate someone to be able to make those decisions in case an emergency came up and you needed that person. During a meeting, if the mayor's absent, then yeah, we have a mayor pro tem doing that.
Difference between B and C, essentially.
What's that?
C4 B and C. B is for meetings.
Absent,
and
yeah.
C is
Yeah,
for
unavailable.
extended
Yeah,
absences.
exactly. Yep. I included the few extra pages on the departments just to pound home that point that the mayor is the administrator, supervisor, director of the department heads. So that just confirms that the department heads are under his authority. And they have their own authority to deal with their own employees, but it's a chain of command there. Okay, so we ran through the paperwork. Any lingering questions, anything else that you guys want to talk about?
Question, and I know the definition, but I want to hear, what does the word shall mean in the charter?
Shall is
Does it
mandatory.
mean must? What does
Yes.
it mean that we must? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if it was suggestive or, okay, all right.
No, and it's intentionally inserted when it's, you shall do it.
Right,
Shall
okay.
do it, yeah.
Like the 5-year plan, for instance, is a shall, something we haven't paid attention to in previous years, but in the last couple of years, we have been doing it.
And a deputy chamberlain in the finance office.
Yeah. Does say there shall be a
Shall
deputy
be,
chamber.
okay.
Will we have to, on page 18, redo C5-3?
The city court?
No, the redo it because they're,
Oh, this is, I apologize, this was printed, I printed this from my computer. There has been subsequent changes.
okay.
I apologize, I should have clarified that, this was outdated. So there's, this C53 has been changed, there is no 10, there is no, I can't remember, but we did those changes after, by local law, after the reorganization. So. Okay, anything else?
Oh, this is helpful.
Call for adjourn. I can do it.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second by Councilor Dowdle. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
You should do a roll call vote.
Roll call?
Counselor Armstrong?
Yes.
Counselor Dowdle?
Yes.
Counselor Ensel?
Yes.
Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Crenzer?
Yes.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean.
Yes, thank you.